Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to go over some common causes for high filter PSI. And one thing you'll notice if the filter gauge is showing high filter pressure is that you'll have really poor flow to the pool. So I'm going to go over some of the common reasons for this. And of course, there are some really obvious reasons and some that aren't quite as obvious, but can also cause the high filter pressure. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro. Unlike other pool problems, high filter pressure PSI is pretty straightforward. And of course, the number one cause of this is a filter that needs to be cleaned. So this is the first thing I look at when I'm looking at a pool with high filter pressure. And that is, when was the last time the filter was cleaned? Are the filter elements good? And we refer to the grids and cartridges inside the filter as elements. I'm not exactly sure where this came from. It's something kind of new because back in the day it was just, filter cartridges or D grids. But now we refer to it as the elements. So you may hear this term. You may go to a pool store and they're like, hey, your elements are bad in your filter. And that's just your grids or your cartridges if you have a D or cartridge filter. And that's just something to be aware of. Now, if you have a sand filter, I guess the element in there would be the sand itself. And this could also be the problem. So the first thing, of course, I look for is the filter clean? And are the elements or the filter grids or cartridges in good shape? I have a rule of thumb on my route, and this is something that's kind of changed over the years as well, because things used to be made a lot better than they are nowadays. Now, don't get me wrong, there are still really well-made pool products, but I find that the filter elements don't last nearly as long as they used to in the old days. So the grids on a D filter tend to last for about 3 or 4 years, and in the old days, they used to last a very long time. I'm saying like 7-8 years without any problems, but I don't think they're manufactured with the same materials or the workmanship they used to be, so they're not going to last nearly as long. So every 3 years, you want to consider changing out all 8 grids in your D filter. Now, if you have a quad type D filter, those seem to be much more durable. You don't have to change those out nearly as often, and I find that you can get several years with a quad D filter. It's really a thick material. The only time I replace the quad D filters is if there's a problem with it. Now, there's a little bit of a side note that sometimes D will leak in when you first charge the quad D filter, and that's not an indicator that there's something wrong with it. It's just one of those things that may happen with your filter. But usually, if the bands are really broken and the pleats are really wide on those, I'll change them out. But they seem to last a very long time with really no issues and no tears or problems. So I would say the quad D filters are very long lasting. I would probably go 5 or 6 years with those. But the regular grid type, I would just go ahead and change those grids out every 3 years without even hesitating, because then you're going to have fresh filter grids or elements and everything will be fine. Now, if you have cartridge filters, I definitely think you should change the 4 quad type cartridge filters out every 3 years. And if you have a single cartridge filter, you're changing that out much more often, probably every 6 months, maybe 9 months with the single cartridge filter, just to have the best efficiency. One of the only exceptions would be the Aquastar pipeline filter. That one, of course, the cartridge is rated a lot better or longer lasting than a standard single cartridge filter. Now, are all cartridge filters created equally? Definitely not. If you get a cheap cartridge filter, it's going to wear out sooner. I would still say that Pleat Coat makes the best cartridge filter. In my opinion, others say that Unicell is the best or Filbert is the best. But I kind of like the Pleat Coat material, even though it's kind of a weird material for a lot of people. I find it to be very long lasting and durable. So I would say don't go with a super cheap cartridge because you're not going to get the same lifespan. As far as the D grids, it's really hard to get the manufacturer grids. Most people will carry, Unicell D grids. Pleat Coat actually makes D grids as well. And these are the replacement grids that typically I would get whatever your supplier has is the grids I'm using, because again, you're going to get about 3 years out of them. There was a time, again, where these things were made a lot better, but those days are gone, and you want to just be proactive and change the filter grids or cartridges more often than not. Now, as far as having a dirty filter, of course, this will cause the high PSI. Basically, think of it like this. You have your filter, and you have an area where the water should be flowing. And if the filter is really dirty at that point, the water flow will be restricted. It's just really common sense, just like your car's air filter or oil filter. If it gets dirty, it's going to restrict the flow, and you have all kinds of problems. Same with the pool. So typically, when the pressure gauge is high on the filter, that's because there's just not enough flow, and you're creating some back pressure. So the pump's pulling the water in, but not enough water is leaving the pump area or the filter itself, causing the pressure to rise in that filter. And this causes really poor flow, because then your return lines you're not feeling anything coming out of the return line. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that the dirtier the filter, the less flow. That's why I really like the Waterco pre-filters. Now you can get one at Leslie's. They have their own version of it, and I always forget how this is named, so I'm going to look it up so I don't mess this up. But I think it is called the JMC 16, and I got it right. That was the JMC 16 Jacuzzi Multicyclone. But Waterco is the manufacturer of these, and I really like these pre-filters. Now, they're really large, so if you have a wall in your equipment area, it's going to stick over it usually, because if you put it on after the fact, they go right on top of the pump. And these things, again, are pretty gigantic. They look small in the photos, but in real life, they're a big system. But I really like it because there's 16 chambers, and this really filters out the dirt so that the filter stays a lot cleaner. These are made specifically for cartridge and sand filters. These are from Australia, and I don't think there are many D filters in Australia, if there are any at all. Usually they're sand filters or cartridge filters. And the reason I mention this is that the Multicyclone will actually filter out any diatomaceous earth you add to the skimmer. So normally when you charge your D filter, you pour the D into the skimmer, it goes right into the filter, and you're fine. But if you have a Multicyclone on top, what this will do is actually trap the DE inside the chambers, and your filter won't get recharged with diatomaceous earth. Now, there is a bypass you can add to this, and they were going to make these for the US market, but I've never actually seen any of them materialize. But it's just a kind of a pipe with a valve on there. I actually have a mock-up of it. If you email me at david@swimmingpoollearning.com, and if you're interested in getting one of these Multicyclones on your D filter, I can send you the schematics. It's not really a schematic, but it's just actually the mock-up of this particular device for a D filter. And I know I'm going off track here, but I really want to emphasize how good these Multicyclones are, because they trap 80 to 90% of the dirt before it gets into the filter, thereby allowing the filter to stay much cleaner, which means that your flow is going to be much better for your pool. And they're really relatively inexpensive. They're like $300 or so, and then you just have to pay for the installation. So for that amount of money, I think you're getting a great product that really will filter all the dirt before it gets to the filter, making your filter stay cleaner and run more effectively for a relatively small investment. And I guess Waterco probably should pay me for this little announcement, but I'm just saying it because these systems work really good. There's a builder here, Blue Haven Pools, that puts one of these on every single pool build, and for good reason. The least amount of time you're spending cleaning your filter, the better. Now, water quality also affects the filter. I find that this is more of a factor in a sand filter or a D filter, especially the quad D filters. I find that the quad D filters are great. I like them. I think they're better because you have a larger square footage area with the cartridge type quad D filters. However, they do a really poor job when the pool is turning. If it's cloudy or green, these filters struggle. So you're going to find that the PSI in the filter gauge is going to be much more affected by the water quality. You know, let's say that you have a pool and you have 3 or 4 dogs swimming in it. This is not uncommon in California. I've had accounts where there were 3 or 4 dogs in it, and the filter, the water looked murky. And if it was a D filter, which is a case in some of these instances, like a Pentair 60 square foot FNS Plus, that filter pressure every week is going to be elevated because of all the junk in the water. And it's just basically the D filter is not great when it starts to get dirty as far as water flow, because it filters so well And that's kind of like a double-edged sword. It's such a great filter that it filters down to 3 microns. However, once the diatomaceous earth starts getting coated with algae, dog hair, and gunk, the flow is really affected on DE filters. Versus a cartridge filter where there's much more flow. If you have a 450 square foot cartridge filter, you're going to have much more flow than a 60 square foot DE filter. So that's usually not the problem with the cartridge filter, although I've had really bad pools impact the cartridge filters. Usually the water quality and the filter PSI on a sand filter and a DE filter are a direct correlation. In other words, the worse the water quality is, cloudy, kind of greenish or milky blue, the higher the filter PSI will be on those filter types. How do you cure this? Well, of course, you want to turn the water back into a crystal clear blue, and this may require several filter cleanings of a DE filter and backwashing it. You may want to flock a pool sand filter or a diatomaceous earth filter. If you have a multi-port valve in a waste mode, then flocking the pool is a great way to drop all the stuff out and clear up the pool. Flock is aluminum sulfate. You add that to the pool based on how much per gallons of your pool, and this will drop everything to the bottom, making your filter run a lot better, and then you just vacuum out the waste. So that's an option also if you have a pool with a waste mode and the pool starting to turn on you. One of the things is once the pool starts to turn, it's kind of like one of those domino effects where one thing leads to another. So let's say that the pool's starting to get a little cloudy, the filter PSI is going up, so you backwash it, add some more diatomaceous earth. Since the pool was turning and you shock it, it's still not that great, and it starts to get a little worse. You didn't add enough chlorine maybe, and then the filter PSI goes up again. You have to clean the filter, and you can see how this can be very frustrating, and sometimes you lose the whole summer season battling a DE filter that, the pool is starting to turn a little bit, and it's a big battle. So my suggestion is don't mess around when you have a pool that's cloudy or has a little bit of algae in there. Just put a ton of chlorine in there. Bring it to 50 parts per million if you have to. And that sounds like a lot, but if you have a 10,000 gallon pool, that's like 3 or 4 gallons of liquid chlorine to bring it to 50 parts per million. So it's not a huge amount of chlorine, but I think a lot of people make the mistake of putting a little bit of chlorine in and thinking it's going to cure the problem, when it just makes the problem worse. And I mentioned that the water quality really impacts the DE filter and the sand filter. So you want to make sure that you just shock that pool and you drop everything and you kill the algae so that the filter is not impacted. But I find that most of the problems with high filter PSI is because the filter is dirty or clogged up, and the water quality is a big thing. I get an email sometimes from someone that's like, hey, my pool filter, it's just not working. There's no water being pulled in from the skimmer. What's the problem? And the first thing I say is, well, is the water blue, crystal clear? And they'll say, no, it's cloudy and murky. Well, that's probably the first problem. So address that. And it sounds kind of, not counterintuitive, I guess would be the word. But a lot of times you're like, well, if the pool is kind of greenish, blue, and it's murky, I don't really want to change my cartridges because then it's going to ruin my new cartridges. So I want to try to clear it up with the old cartridges in there first. This is a problem that a lot of people run into. And this is like one of those psychological barriers too when I'm doing a green pool cleanup. And I tell the customer, oh, you need new cartridges. It's like, well, wait until the pool's cleared, then I'll buy the new cartridges. But I always tell them, I know it doesn't sound logical, but if you put the new cartridges in now, the pool's actually going to turn around much quicker. And it may not even turn around ever with the old cartridges in there because they're shot. So you have to kind of educate the customer that this does sound kind of, counterintuitive, but it's kind of like anything out there. It's effective because it just works. And it's one of those things where if you're having trouble with the pool, changing out the cartridges or the DE grids may solve that problem almost immediately in a lot of cases, because the new cartridges are fresh and you can clean them off and you can take all the stuff off them pretty easily. And the new grids are fresh also, and this will let more water flow in. I can see many times when I was doing a green pool cleanup with a DE filter, even, when the grids looked fairly decent, they still were clogged up. The pores weren't active as well. And so when I changed those out with new grids, the green pool cleaned up, or the kind of semi-green pool, I call it milky blue. It's kind of like a whitish kind of water. It's hard to describe it on the podcast, but if you have done a lot of green pool cleanups, you know what I'm talking about. No longer green, but it's not blue yet. And if you change the grids out at that point, you're going to see a dramatic turnaround very rapidly with the new filter grids in there. Now I know I'm spending a lot of time talking about filter and filter problems, but that's usually the case when you have high filter PSI. There's not a lot of other causes besides the filter being dirty. Now there are some causes of this that I can address here that fall into like the kind of strange realm. One of the first ones is that the pressure gauge isn't working. So of course tap on that thing to make sure that you're getting, that the actual needle is moving, and then you can be rest assured that that's fine. But I always carry extra gauges to do that. Another thing could be a problem is that your system can just run high PSI because of the way it's plumbed in. This happens a lot. I see this with a lot of older pools. It just doesn't have a lot of flow because it's plumbed in. It's plumbed that way, and you're going to have high PSI no matter what you do. Now, what actually is the starting PSI of a filter? It's really hard to say because of the variable speed pumps. So at a lower RPM, the PSI is going to be lower. At a higher RPM, it's going to be higher. If you're in spa mode, it's going to be higher automatically because the spa jets are smaller. So it's really hard to say what is a good starting PSI. I guess the best way to find out is to turn your VS pump, variable speed pump, to 100% output or full speed or 3450 RPMs, and then see what the gauge is at. Typically a DE filter will be at 20 PSI when it's fresh and new, maybe 18 PSI. A cartridge filter should be, if you have 4 cartridges in there, it should be about 20 PSI as well. If you have a single cartridge filter, you're looking probably at 14 PSI, giving a nod to a Facebook group that's named that. And then the sand filter generally is at 20 PSI. So when it goes to 30, generally you have to clean that filter to get the PSI to drop back down so that you have good flow. And again, it's one of those things where one thing affects another. If you let the PSI stay at 30 for a week, chances are the pool's going to start to turn on you because it's not flowing well. You're not getting the chlorine distributed properly, and therefore you're going to have a semi-green pool, a cloudy pool, or a green pool, and then the filter's going to get clogged up, and then you're going to have that whole cycle again. So you want to make sure you break that cycle by getting on things right away. So once the PSI goes to 30 on a D filter or sand filter, you would want to backwash that filter. Now, there's a big debate of how much DE to put back in. I like to put about, half of what I put in when I first did it. If I give it a full backwash, that is. So if I put 8 scoops in, I'll put 4 scoops in after a backwash. And that's like a minute or two, a minute and a half, 2-minute backwashing. A sand filter, you don't have to add anything back into it. You just backwash it and it should drop down to 20. Cartridge filters, a lot of times the 4 cartridge filters that don't show high PSI. So that's something that you're just going to have to figure out with the flow and by taking it apart and cleaning it. The smaller ones definitely will go up to even 30 PSI when they're really dirty. So that's the first reason, or the main reason, that the high PSI. And I went back again to the filter being the problem. Another thing that can be a problem is also something on the return line that's blocking the flow. Extremely rare that this would happen, but it is a possibility. And this can be, of course, very dangerous. So you want to make sure there's nothing wrong with your return lines to the pool. And this could cause the filter PSI to be high on that filter. And then, of course, if you have anything connected that's restricting the flow back to the pool, or if you have it maybe on a water feature mode, this could also affect the PSI because you're having some restriction with the returns. But if you have like a Polaris 360, which is a return side cleaner or pressure, I would say return side pressure cleaner, this could also cause that problem. If you have like a pool skim on one of the lines, it could cause a problem as well. Any kind of restriction on the return jets will cause the PSI to go higher in the pool. So just be aware of that. So if you're adding a pool skim, which I highly recommend, by the way, because this is great for those pools with heavy debris, but you are restricting sometimes some of the return lines, which will cause the PSI to go higher. And then the Polaris 360 is a great return side cleaner, but the side effect is that the PSI will be a little higher with the return side cleaner. So all of these are factors with the higher PSI. Regardless of what's causing the high PSI, addressing it right away is the key to success, because I mentioned a few times here, it's like a domino effect, or things happen in a circle. If things get out of hand because the flow is not good to the pool, then everything's going to get way out of hand for that reason. So be proactive at the beginning of the season. Clean your filter at least twice during the season, maybe 3 times in some cases. But you want to make sure that you clean your filter regularly. Backwashing a D filter is not going to solve it. Every 6 months, you should take that D filter apart and clean it. In a cartridge filter, you should be cleaning the single cartridge filters once a month. And if you have a multi-cartridge, 4-cartridge type filter, you want to clean that every 6 months at the minimum. And you'll know right away when there's a problem. You'll see the flow being affected, and you'll also see the water quality being affected. And the PSI is a good indicator that this is going to be a problem. And make sure you keep that in the clean range as much as possible during the season. And if it's not low, if it's high all the time, see if you can address the problems. Usually something that I mentioned here will solve that problem and will be the cure for that PSI being high on your filter gauge. Looking for other podcasts I've recorded, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. Just click on the podcast banner, and close to 1,500 podcasts are available there for you. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Real quick, if you're not using pool service software, try Skimmer free for 30 days at getskimmer.com/poolguy. Again, that's getskimmer.com/poolguy. Skimmer, everything you need to run your pool service business all in one app. Pool Service Pro, open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.